Colleagues of the Perl and Raku Conference of 2022, wear sunscreen. If I could offer you only one tip for the future, sunscreen would be it. The long-term benefits of sunscreen have been proved by scientists, whereas the rest of my advice has no basis more reliable than my own meandering experience. I will dispense this advice now. You were expecting music? No, you don't get that either. Some of you know my husband and I, 2 years ago, sold our house here in the Houston suburbs. We were way out on the northwest side of Houston with 2,000 square feet and a $2,000 a month mortgage. And the kids had grown and left the house. And we both kind of had this aha moment about how foolish that was. And so we sold the house and we bought a travel trailer. And we travel around the country in it. This is us near Winslow, Arizona, the first fall we were doing it. And that's the morning of the first freeze that we had to deal with. It was very, very cold that morning. For the first time, we were just like, oh my goodness, this is not. But a few weeks later, we were at the Grand Canyon. And we have seen some amazing things in 2 years. While we were at the Grand Canyon, one morning it was pleasant and cool, and I had the window open. And the screen was even pulled back. And I'm clattering away on whatever I'm doing for work. And I hear this, and I look up, and the head of an elk is this close to me. This giant elk has stuck her head in the rig and is sniffing around. Well, I didn't move. I did not want this large animal annoyed at me. It's kind of like annoying a trucker on the road. Do you really want to do that? And after a moment or two of sniffing around, she backed out of the rig. And I stuck my head out the window, and right by the bumper was her calf, who was absolutely adorable, sniffing around and looked up at me, and it was this wonderful thing that I had never had the opportunity to experience before. Getting to encounter things like that and seeing things like this, I never thought I would be able to do that in my lifetime. I'd never been to the Grand Canyon. But it's not all mind-bendingly amazing experiences and Instagram-worthy photos. Sometimes it's a backseat driver giving you static. This is our dog, Henry, and he was, in fact, giving his father static because there was no more treats in the truck at the time. We have learned some important things, though. In doing this for the last 2 years, we've learned some important things. Every article of clothing that you own will acquire an amazing array of wrinkles. Yeah. There's always that one person who thinks that always leash your dog does not apply to their very good boy. These are usually the same people who never clean up after their pet. Don't be that person. The leading cause of divorce among full-time RVers is backing the rig, which has led to a great side hustle. My husband sent me a picture the other day of a woman sitting in a campground entrance with a sign, "We'll back your rig $10." Bad weather and bad neighbors are temporary. Ants, however, are eternal. Mike's nodding knowledgeably back there. Yes, we know this thing. All RV Wi-Fi sucks. Every RV park that has Wi-Fi will brag about how amazing their Wi-Fi is. And it's all lies. It always sucks. Sometimes it sucks slightly less. And when you have an important Zoom call, the more important it is, the more likely this is what you will see. Timing is everything. The measure of a good shower has nothing to do with its temperature or duration. It has everything to do with water pressure and whether or not you can leave the water running. Navy showers, does anybody know that term? Yeah, I took my first Hollywood shower in 3 years, I think, today. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. And evolution has given humankind shins so that we can find this in the dark. Fortunately, my shin is made out of titanium, so, I win those encounters. When I started programming in Perl, it was 2002. Now, I had a degree in computer science. I graduated in 1993, having crammed 4 years into 7. And I was working for a group of libraries, a consortium of libraries in West Texas. And just for history, now, how many of you were programming Perl in 2002? All right, about half of our audience, right? A little more than half, maybe. But let's review some history. 5.8 wasn't out yet. That came in July of that year. CPAN was less than 7 years old. The Perl 6 design process was only 2 years old. Test More was still new, and Test 2 didn't even exist yet. Test 2 wasn't even an idea yet. The first QA hackathon, which became the Perl Toolchain Summit, was 6 years in the future. And here's a list of modules that are fairly common use these days that didn't even exist. All of them were at least 3 years in the future, and my favorite was a decade away when I started programming. That's where we were in 2002. Now, how I learned Perl, we had just bought a new library automation system from a company called Circe, which is now Circe Dynix. They merged. There is no such thing as a merger in American corporate law. There is always a purchase. Somebody bought somebody, and whoever got bought loses. It's just that way. That's how it works. There was a merger, but Circe at the time was this small little company from Huntsville, Alabama that had a really great library automation system. And they had a Windows client that worked really, really well. And they advertised an API. Now, it's not an API the way we think of an API today. All right, it was a group of compiled binaries that would do queries against the peculiar proprietary database structure and return results for you. And you paid a god-awful amount of money to go and learn how to use these command line scripts that they had written. That's their API. Right? And it was stuff like this. So at the command line, you'd say select user, and in this case, I'm looking for all users who have more than one checkout, have one or more checkouts, and they're an academic user. They're a profile user, like a student at a university. And I want to output the user keys, and I have a place for my errors. In the second line, I want to take that user key and find all their checkouts. And since I don't specify my output through -O, there's a standard default value, which is stuff like the barcode of the user and the barcode of the book they've borrowed and when it's due and when they checked it out. And it output the results pipe-delimited. And they didn't even specify using text CSV to split this. We used split. Lovely strings to wrangle, right? You had all these lovely strings to massage and do fun things with. Well, what language is good for that? Gosh. Perl. Thank you. Todd, you put them to sleep. You never know where that trap is going to show up, do you? Yeah, Perl's the best language around for wrangling strings, especially if you looked at it in 2002. It was great for that. And in fact, our teacher said, well, here's this language, and it's installed on your Solaris box. It's ready to go, and it's really good at this kind of stuff. Now, it used to be used for a lot of web scripting stuff, but people have kind of moved on from that now. So in 2002, she's telling me it's a dying language. 20 years later, I'm writing the best code of my life and making the most money I've ever made with a dead language. And so are some of you. Yeah? Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. At least somebody's awake. Todd. Gosh, you put him to sleep. We got to talk about that. In 2008, I left that library consortium, and I went to work for a company that was selling support and hosting for Koha, which is also a library automation system. It was originally written as a solution to the Y2K problem. Now, let me sidetrack a little bit. The Y2K problem, which the media immediately after midnight on January 1st dismissed as, oh, such a non-issue after all, see? It's because of people like you and me who worked hard 50-hour weeks for 3 years to make sure it wasn't a problem. Am I right? Yeah. Thank you. We worked our butts off to make sure it wasn't a problem. I was working at the time for a clinical laboratory company, and every piece of hardware we had to be tested extensively to make sure it wasn't going to be a problem. And new software had to be written. Well, Koha was written as a solution to that. They had a Y2K vulnerable library automation system, an old thing that they'd hand-rolled. So they hand-rolled a new one, and then they open-sourced it. It is the first large-scale open-source integrated library system in the world. It's still very active. It's installed in hundreds of libraries around the world. It's still under active development. That community is still just as busy as it has ever been, and they're continually adding new features to try to keep up with what libraries are doing. Many of the active developers don't have programming backgrounds. Now, this thing is all written in Perl, right? This whole big monster thing that was written in 1999 before Dancer existed, right? Well, and you have all these people who are just kind of geeky librarians. In a lot of libraries, their IT person has to be a degreed librarian. You have to have a master's degree in library science. It's just one of the weird kind of hiring requirements. Libraries are kind of funny that way. They expect certain positions, especially in academic libraries, faculty positions, to have master's degrees. Though if you want good wages, you have to have a master's degree. Of course, the joke is getting a master's degree lets you get a job at minimum wage in libraries. That you get a starting salary that I couldn't afford to live on now. So you have these kind of nerdy librarians who are writing Perl, and they're writing big applications in Perl. Well, a side effect of that is that the Perl was kind of least common denominator Perl. It was very procedural, you never saw a ternary if. You completely never saw a nested ternary if, which, if you're familiar, is kind of sort of useful like a case statement, sort of, sometimes, carefully. You can kind of fake a case statement out in some simple cases with a ternary if, right? You never saw that. Never saw it in the code. I left that community in 2013. Shortly after that, they introduced DivX class. Before that, they were using DBI, directly talking to MySQL. Now you can do, of course, MySQL or Mariah, but they still have a lot of DBI code in there. DBH do, yeah, had a whole bunch of those. They just got DivX class, started 7 years ago, and they're not done switching to that yet. The first appearance of any kind of modern web framework was just a year ago. Just a year ago, and they're doing that for some of the web APIs, which in fact are APIs like we think of them. They're doing some REST APIs using Mojo now. Just now. And you still see this, and I grepped the code base the other day because it's on the net, and you still see a lot of this in there. I see a few of you cringing. Quite justifiably, because you still see an awful lot of this. This appears hundreds of times in the code base, because they have all these CGI scripts. That's how it runs. Wow, you know. While I was there in 2011, my colleague, another developer, said, well, there's this conference I found out about, and it's going to be in Asheville this year, called YAPC, and it's about Perl. And I didn't even know there was such a thing, and maybe we ought to go to it. Maybe we can convince our boss to let us go to that. Well, the problem was I was due to have a big surgery about 3 weeks after that, and I was going to have to be off of a bunch of medications, and I had no idea what my body was going to be doing at that point, and I said, you know, I'd love to. I think that's a great idea. It's not this year, not for me. He ended up not going because he really wanted somebody to go with him. And the following year, I convinced my boss to go halvesies with me, and I paid my own way, and he reimbursed part of it. And I took a bus from Lawrence, Kansas to Madison, Wisconsin, which, if you ever get the opportunity to do it, don't. It was an absolutely miserable trip, but I did it. I got to Madison. Lots of firsts there. I thought I was going to be the only transgender person in the room, right? Because, basically, if you have 300 people in a room in America, one of them will be transgender. That's at most one. That's the math. There were 7. Some of you will remember, of course. And it was kind of neat. I thought that was pretty cool. And I heard about some others that weren't there, like Audrey, for instance. I've never met Audrey. I would love to one day. Haven't yet. Some other firsts. I got hugged by Matt Trout. He almost learned that sneaking up on me is hazardous. Don't do that. But fortunately, somebody was looking over my shoulder and didn't look concerned, so I didn't twist off on him at the moment when he did that. I met a bunch of great cPanel people. As an aside, cPanel is a platinum sponsor of this conference. cPanel people, can you wave your hands and say, yay? There's a whole bunch of them right over here. Thank you for sponsoring the conference, cPanel. I met a bunch of great cPanel people. I think they had 40 people at that conference that they'd sent up to Madison. A bunch of bodies. Wade Johnson was there, and Wade was fantastic. And he and I talked about the possibility, let's think about pretty soon let's talk about maybe me coming to work for cPanel. We had a great conversation. I gave my first lightning talk, Jeff, and I didn't get the gong. And as happens occasionally, it was a rebuttal to the keynote, a partial rebuttal. I said, gosh, isn't Perl about there's more than one way to do what you're trying to do, Schwerin? And yeah, that was it. And I had a really bad moment. And this was totally unrelated to the conference. I was very down on who I was. My world was trying to collapse in on me. And it almost did. It was almost one of those where people would be having memorial things, except that I was brand new. It was my first time, right? But I ended up not doing it. And it's because of somebody in the Perl conference at the time, in YAPC, someone there, a member of this community, just came and talked to me and said, "Are you all right?" And I said, "I'm just resting a little while. I'm waiting. I just need a break." And that got me past that moment. Just somebody taking a moment, frankly, to give a damn about me. More on that in a minute. I also got all kinds of intimidated. Yes, I am, David. I'm going there. I found Dave Rolski very intimidating the first time I met him. And I finally figured out why yesterday, and we talked about it, and it's kind of hilarious and completely inadvertent because he's not at all intimidating. He's just a giant teddy bear, but don't tell him I told you so. But I met so many great people that time that have been good friends and good colleagues ever since. And I met some people who annoyed the crap out of me and have continued to annoy the crap out of me ever since. Now, the following year, I did, in fact, leave the library world, didn't come back, and I went to cPanel. And 6 weeks, and Wade kind of shepherded the whole hiring process, and he got me in there and got me moved down from Lawrence to Houston, and because at that time they were very interested in people being local. They still apparently are, however, hopefully somebody's convincing them that that's not, in fact, the best way to run a business. But, whatever. I moved to Houston, started roasting because it was March, April. And 6 weeks after I got there, the person who had been mentoring me, Wade, left. And I went through a series of managers, a couple of whom are in the room, and mentors, again, a couple of whom are in the room. But I think partly because of the way that Wade had hired me and what he intended for me to do, it was a role that wasn't very well understood by anybody else or by me, really. So I spent about a year kind of drifting and not really being nearly as productive as I hoped I could be. And then I ended up on a team with 3 other maniacs, appropriately named Loose Cannon. And that team quickly acquired a reputation for these are the lunatics. These are the crazy ones. Isn't that right, Tom? Something like that, yeah. But it was a good team. We had a good time. We got a lot of cool things done. We did some cool work together. And in the process, while we're doing that, I got to attend some other conferences. I got to go around some. CPANL actually sent me to Perl conferences and YAPSEs and things. One of the memorable ones was Salt Lake City. The first Salt Lake City in 2015, I had been digging around in Dancer 2. I was trying to set up some little something, and I found a bug in Locale, which Dan Muey had written. And I had tried talking to him at work, and no. Dan has this thing that he does, and you can't really get him away from it sometimes. But I caught him and Sawyer at the conference, and we sat in the lobby and worked on it. All right, and my slides advanced automatically when they should not have, and Orlando happened a week after the Pulse nightclub shooting. And kind of at the last minute, I worked with the organizers to set up a silent auction. And so many people brought things to donate to that auction, both technical and non-technical. My peers at cPanel gave out we had all kinds of cool swag and geeky things, t-shirts and a quilt made out of cPanel t-shirts, and we had all kinds of fun things. Sawyer knitted a scarf on the plane on the way over and gave it to me. We had so many neat things, and everybody jumped in and bid. There were very few items that didn't get at least 2 or 3 bids, and we were able to donate a big sum of money to support that community, and that felt really good. And it felt really good to have kind of shepherded that along. I really enjoyed doing that. In 2017, the next year, Sawyer invited me to Amsterdam. Now, that was the first time I was ever in Europe. I had traveled once to the Middle East before that, once to India, and twice to Canada, but I'd never been in Europe at all. And I went to Amsterdam. Now, if you've never been to Amsterdam, it's just a fascinating city. It's an insanely busy airport. I just was stunned at how crazy the airport was, even by American standards, and American airports get pretty nuts too. And I had such a good time at the conference. It was a great little conference. I don't know, 120 people maybe, 130, not much bigger than this. But it was a fantastic conference. The first day of the conference, Damian Conway was the keynote. And when he sat down, I was so freaking scared. I was intimidated as hell because he's Damian, right? He's great. He's a fantastic speaker. He's a genius. The second day speaker was Larry Wall, and I was suddenly less intimidated. Honestly, I adore Larry and Gloria, both of them. They are brilliant, wonderful, caring, sweet people. Larry is not the most exciting speaker on the market. We'll just say that. And after that, I told the organizers, I don't need 90 minutes, please give me an hour. They carved off the half an hour that I knew I didn't need, and they gave it to somebody else for a breakout session. And I got up there the third day and did my thing, and it was amazing. It went very well. And in fact, later that day, I was buzzing around the back of the room, and Damien was sitting there, and he says, "Oh, Ruth, great job on your talk today." I said, thanks, Damien. That means a lot coming from you. I mean, you do this for a living. You do this all the time. I'd never been paid at that point to stand up and speak. And he said, well, they gave you a standing ovation. They didn't do that to me. That meant a lot. That was cool. Also at that conference was the first time another Perl person came out to me. They said, I've been preparing to be transgender for some time. My spouse knows. And seeing you up there doing it and being a success is motivating me to move forward. Now, those of you who are not part of the LGBTQ community, I don't think can fully appreciate how huge that is. But that person is now one of my dearest sisters. It's an amazing thing that happens. And that's not the first time that's happened. The following year, Mark Keating asked me to come to Glasgow. He said, can you keynote again? Only this time I was the first keynote, not the third one. And I had a great time. I'd never been to the UK before. And I tell you what, riding a wheelchair around in Glasgow is a special sort of challenge. The streets are made of bricks that are ancient. All right, so I was staying at a hotel about 5 blocks away from the conference center, from the venue, and the first morning I was going down there, I ended up kind of on the wrong street. And there's a curb, and I was in a powered wheelchair. I used to have a lot of problems with my knees. I have rehabbed my knees, and I'm able to walk now. Isn't that wonderful? I couldn't back the chair up that curb. The power wheels are on the back, and so I wanted to back up onto that curb, and I couldn't do it. And I was standing there trying, I was sitting and cranking the thing, and it just wouldn't work. And this man comes up to me, a Glaswegian, a native, and he said, in Glasgow they speak English, right? So they say. But the Glaswegian accent is completely foreign to me. They might as well be speaking Swahili. And he points at the chair, and I said, yes, I would love a little assistance. Thank you. Just grab that handle there and pull up. And he said, oh, yeah. He pulls up, and I get over the curb, and I turn around and I said, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And he said, right, tomorrow. And I took that to mean tomorrow, try the next street over. Because it turns out the next street over was, in fact, better, slightly. I was able to get over the curbs myself there. At Glasgow, when I got down from the stage, when I finished my talk and sat down, I was in a weird, strange headspace. I get that way occasionally when I speak. The bigger the audience, the more likely that is. And that room was really, really small for the number of people we had in it. It was at capacity. The room was not licensed for more bodies than we had in it, so it felt really crowded. It was low ceiling. It wasn't a big ballroom like this. So it felt really crowded, and I'd just done this really intense talk, and I sat down, and I was in this weird space. And Jeff Goff comes over to me, and he says, Ruthie, are you all right? Now, I said it quicker than he did. There was always a lot of stuttering in the middle of it. And I just shook my head no, and he said, do you want to go back to the hotel? He said, let me get my bag. And he got his bag, and we left and went back to my hotel, and he waited in the lobby, and I went upstairs and changed clothes and washed my face and got my head screwed back on straight and came back down, and he said, all right, now let's talk about it. Are you all right? What happened? Because he knew, having known me for years, he knew that something was wrong. He didn't know what. And it was not nearly the kind of headspace that I'd been in 2012. No, it wasn't that. But it was a strange spot in my head. I was angry. I was upset. I was just inside out about a couple of things, and I couldn't really express it in the keynote. And I didn't change my keynote. I said some things that I felt from my heart. And Jeff just did what Jeff did. He cared and listened. And after that, things got better. Now, he was just getting ready to start consulting. Now, where did my images go? It's probably Nico's fault. Thank you. He was just getting ready to start consulting for a company that he'd found out about, and he said, yeah, I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be really good for me. And just a few weeks later, he messaged me and said, oh man, they're great. You got to get on with these guys. They are so fantastic. And that led to the strangest interview process I've ever been through, bar none. Also the best interview process I've ever been through. I mean, there's a reason Dave does a talk about making interviews suck 20% less. A 20% less sucky interview still sucks, right? Has anybody had an interview where they felt accepted, loved, affirmed, and respected? All of those at the same time? Doesn't happen many. See how many hands we got up? Just a couple. It doesn't happen terribly often. It's rare to have an interview process that validates the candidate, not push them down. And so that's where I work now for the last 3.5 years. I work for the best bosses on earth. Some of you may disagree with me on that. I will fight you, and I will win. And yes, we are hiring, and he's sitting right back there. Neil, raise your hand, please. Thank you. Go talk to that guy. If you want to work for the best bosses on earth, Nico, what have you done to me again? He comes up here, pushes a button, and then like 60 seconds later, I die again. What? I'm just giving you grief because you know I love you, right? All right, I started working there November 1st of that year. That was 2018. And I've done it ever since. I work from home. We're fully remote. The plague hurt us a little bit, but not too much. One of our biggest customers is a fabric manufacturer, and that went really, really well. We do business process automation for manufacturing and other interests. And it's fun, cool stuff. We use Dancer 2 and Debix class and give Mike lots of judgy faces because that's what we do. It's a group of people, and some who are with us and some who are no longer, who care about each other, care about the work we do and the clients we're doing it for. And if that's the kind of place you want to work for, go see Mike or Neil sometime during this conference. Do it. I mean it. Because that's what we've got. The sum of 20 years. How do you sum up 20 years? You don't really. I don't guess. The sum of 20 years. There's been some happy, there's been some sad, there's been some laughs, there's been some anger. It's a microcosm of life, right? It's just a small subset. You know, we spend basically a third of our life working, a third sleeping, and a third working, some of us. But it's a slice of life. You know, it can be really frustrating, and it can be really joyful, and it can be amazing and breathtaking, just like going to the Grand Canyon and meeting elk up close. It can be wonderful. It can be frustrating like a flat tire in a desert road. Yeah, all those things. It's still the same stuff. I think it is worth talking about a couple of specific individuals at this point. First, this one. Some of you, yes, I heard some applause start. Bring it. Rest his soul, Jeff Goff, taken from us way too soon. I owe what I am doing right now, this instant standing up here, to that guy. I would not have taken this job that I now hold without him pushing me in that direction. They would not have hired me without him pushing me in their direction. And I would not be the developer or the person that I am now without that guy in my life. There it is. It's just that simple. And that's what can come out of this community, is somebody like that. This photograph is one of my prized possessions. It's the file that I have backed up in most places. This is right after I spoke at Amsterdam. And Mark Keating was sitting right here, and David Adler was sitting next to him, and as soon as I finished, Adler was on his feet. And that happened. And that is what our relationship looked like. We were there for each other, and he was so sweet and so good to me. That's what can come of this community. Friends that you can care about that much. All right, Mark Keating took that picture, I think it was Mark. He was sitting right down there and just happened to reach up and pop it. And then he emailed it to me later, and he's like, I think you want this. I said, you know me too well, buddy. You know I want that. Now, reminiscing. Reminiscing is kind of fun sometimes, right? But what's the takeaway? What do you get out of this? I mean, this has all been fun, and some of it's been funny, but what's the takeaway? Well, how do we get those good experiences for more of ourselves and for more of the people who aren't in the room, the developers back at home who didn't come to the conference with us? How do we get that for more Perl developers, both the existing ones and new ones that we may find along the way? Well, the case can be made that it's totally a technical problem. You know, Perl doesn't work well on mobile, and it doesn't work well in this kind of platform or that kind of platform. That's true. And it doesn't. And the Perl steering committee and that group of people can work on those kinds of things. It doesn't have built-in object-oriented, it just has bless. Well, we're working on that, in fact. I wish Curtis was here to talk about it. But, you know, losing your passport. What? Okay, enough. I would, you know, ironically, I wish he was here so I could give him crap about that, but, you know. He'll see the video, yeah. And okay, Curtis, just so we're saying. Someone else said that is the most Curtis thing I've ever heard of him doing. I shan't say who because he'll know, because he'll watch it, right? But there's also a case that can be made for part of the problem, part of the reason. Okay, well, so Perl is so far down on all of the survey lists that it doesn't even show up, right? And yet Python, which is only 4 years younger than Perl, remains near the top. Why is that? Well, partly it's a technical issue. And Abigail and I had a wonderful conversation about that yesterday, wherein we both disagreed, and yet we're still very civil about it because that's what we do. But I would submit to you that there's at least a little bit of a person problem there. At least a little bit. Yeah, there's technical issues, but you can do a lot of really cool things with Perl as it is right now. I know that because that's what I do. I do things that make businesses grow, and I like it. A developer who is not here, who is a CPAN author, fairly experienced member of this community, told me this. They are not pushing any Perl at work, even though they are in a position to do so, because they do not wish to bring the potential of the harms of a cranky community into the mix. Now, since all communities have these kinds of problems, just about, except, as Dave Rolski says, the Rust community, which is wonderful and nice and perfect, and why aren't we all doing that? Yes, but why add to the problem? Well, how do we fix that? You know, a big part of the human problem, and it's not just about Perl or just about technology or just about it's about human, about being people, is that we have this big case of bystander syndrome. They'll do something. Somebody else will do something that's going to fix all of this. Now, in the case of technical matters, that's very much true. I'm not qualified to be doing that top level stuff. That's not what I do. I'm an application developer, not a back-end interpreter developer. But there are people doing that. They're not here either, some of them. And Todd was wanting to give some of them static. So incorporate static by reference here for those people. This anonymous CPAN author says this thing to me, this experienced Perl developer says this thing to me, and I wonder what can we as individuals and as a group do to make it better? Well, I need to borrow a little bit from John F. Kennedy. My friends, ask not what Perl can do for you, but what you can do for Perl. What are the things that you can do, and why would you want to? Let's talk about that in just a minute, just for a moment. I have told my boss since about 6 months after I started the job, this is the last job I ever want to hold. How many of you are 45 or older? Hands up. Come on, don't be shy. All right, all of you who just raised your hand are at least halfway through your career, probably at least halfway through your life. Sad fact, there it is. What is your interest? What is your vested interest in doing the things that we do with Perl? And, do you want the community to be successful and want these things to still be available for you to keep doing what you're doing? I think most of us here are the kind of people who actually want Perl to still exist 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, right? Does anybody say Perl needs to die, we need to take it away? If so, the door's that away and the beatings will commence outside, all right? Just saying. We want this to keep going, right? Thank you. Goodness gracious. Had to wait forever for that. Where are you guys? You want to keep doing what you're doing? Maybe learn and grow and doing a little better, right? You want to learn some cool new things along the way? Yeah? Thank you. Goodness. All right. I told my boss I want this to be the last job I ever hold. None of us are getting any younger. We're all staring down retirement at some point or another. And for those of us who are 50 and up, that's starting to look a little closer. For what passes for retirement. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I'm going to quit programming one day, and the next day you're going to put me in a box in the ground, because I'll be programming until the day I die. Yes. And I'm not a type A New Yorker like Matthew. I'm actually going to relax for a minute or two a day in my retirement, right? But I have a vested interest in Perl, Dancer 2, DivX class, PostgreSQL, JavaScript, jQuery, DevExtreme, the toolkit we use for our UI, and all the supporting bits that make all those work. I have a vested interest in those continuing and going forward and growing and being improved and maintained. So what can I do? What can Ruthie do to make that happen? All right, I'm in a room full of nerds. How many of us have at least one box at home, turned off, not doing anything, that could run any version of Linux? Thought so. Most of the hands in the room. How many of us have a desktop or a laptop that can run VirtualBox or some other virtualization platform? Or both, right? Want to run a CPAN testing service? Yes, I admit it's still a little arcane, but testing helps. Especially if you want to pick out like an older version of the kernel or a strange OS that isn't used much, or I've got it. Hey, I live in an RV. I don't have room for a lot of junk. I don't get to carry around dead boxes very much, but I've got 2 Raspberry Pis set up as testing boxes. 2 of them. One's a 3 and one's a 4. So it's ARM v7 and ARM 64. Run and test. They don't run all the time. When we're boondocking, power is limited, so I turn them off. When we're on the road, power is off. But when we're parked, I just let them run. And can companies do that kind of thing too? We're actually talking about that, doing exactly that at Clearbuilt. Because all our customers are in the Eastern time zone, and they all go home at night. So there's a whole bunch of extra cycles at night. Let's let some testing happen. Some way safe that isn't going to disrupt that morning's work. Let's find a way to do a little bit. So we're doing that. How many of us have written a module, be honest with yourselves please, that could be released to CPAN because it might be useful to somebody else and you have not done so yet? Okay, your excuses are no longer valid. Thank you. Come to my talk tomorrow on Distilla, and I will teach you an easy way to get it out the door. We'll be talking about that. Share that code that you can with the community. It's a little thing. It's a tiny thing. Even if it's a dumb little script that just interfaces with Twitter and there's already 4 like it, do it. Release the code. Let the code out. Somebody else might find it useful. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? Thank you. Nobody uses it. You got a statistic for releasing your first module. That's not a bad thing. Nobody else uses it. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But you participated. Give back just a little. Does your company write modules that can be released? I know Best Practical has their own CPAN name. Clearbuilt now has its own CPAN name. We're going to be releasing some modules too. I know cPanel has released a number of modules over the years. Talk to your bosses. Hey, can we open source this cool idea that we had? We wrote a little module and it just helps with this one little thing, but you know, it might be useful to somebody else. Why not release it? Release the code. Let it out. Participate. Show up. Are you doing something cool with Perl? I mean, look at the schedule. You've got a number of people who are doing interesting things with Perl. I mean, Will has a talk in for juggling patterns. I'm kind of curious about that. Yeah, there's all kinds of interesting things going on with Perl. Talk about it. I haven't seen a Perl mongers group yet, ever, that will turn away a good speaker. Or even a willing speaker. You don't even have to be good. You just have to be willing, right? If you're really unfortunate, it may take a month or two for them to put you in the schedule. I mean, Jason Crome from Charlotte PM has learned that he has a friend who won't tell him no when he says we need somebody to speak. Because I'm always able to talk about something I'm doing with Perl. Now, one of the last things I want to talk about here, and we're running down toward the end here. Y'all know who this is, right? Goodness gracious. He's Nico. Where's he at? Where'd he go? What? Right? He's yelled himself blue in the face. Right? Gordon Ramsay is a brilliant chef. If you've ever watched a video of him cooking by himself in his kitchen, he's amazing. You can learn awesome things from him. He's incredibly passionate about cooking good food. And he has this reputation of treating everybody except other people's children badly. Right? He's a jerk to every adult on earth, just about. He's not a jerk to me because he hasn't met me. I could ask the question, who is that in the Perl community? Who is the Gordon Ramsay of Perl? And all of us, I think, who have been around more than 7 or 8 minutes, could point at somebody, maybe in the room and maybe not. But how many of us would say, and please spend some time introspecting here, would say that there's somebody else in the room here who would say, you are that? Oh, yeah, that's a tough question, isn't it? Is there anybody in the room that would think you're the jerk of the community? If so, why? And why on earth are you okay with that? What are you doing that's making them think that? And why don't you please stop? All right, when somebody comes and asks a question, they're trying to learn Perl and they have done something. Look, most things in Perl can be done 7 or 8 different ways. We know that. It's part of there's more than one way to do it, right? That means that any of them that work is a right way. If it doesn't compile, then yeah, that's different. But if it runs, it's a right way to do it. Now, maybe it's not the most efficient way or the most elegant way or the most idiomatic way or whatever, but standing up there and yelling, "You're doing it wrong," is the wrong answer. Always, 100% of the time. And somebody brings an idea that you disagree with and says, maybe we ought to do this, saying, you ought to quit while you're ahead, is the wrong answer. You're just being a troll. Stop. And disagreeing with people is fine. I mean, Abigail and I disagree on so many things. He just has a completely different view on the world in so many ways than I do. And we disagree on so many ways. But I am not going to call him an arrogant jerk. Some of the time you are. Like our conversation yesterday, you convinced me of some things, thank you. And so I've kind of taken that to heart. There have been changes because of it. Larry said this in an email. In 1999, before I was even part of the Perl community, and this is actually in the code in a comment. He was responding to something about changing how sig-die worked, or I don't even remember what, some deep internal thing. It is also my opinion that polite arguments degenerate to personal arguments far too frequently, and when they do, it's because both people wanted it to, or at least didn't sufficiently want it not to. Why does it get into a personal argument? Because you didn't keep it from doing so. And I think what lets Abigail and I disagree so stridently and yet still be such wonderful friends is that neither of us let it get personal. It's not about the fact that he's an arrogant Dutchman. We just disagree. And we can both explain that in a civil way, and we can talk about and we can present the case in a rational, sane way. Why can't other people do that? I wish more people could. The world would be better off and the community would be better off. These trolls, people like that who just yell and carry on and get personal. I had another Perl developer tell me this. I would have to admit that I would have trouble listening to any advice from, and they named somebody, and I shan't, even if it was the fire extinguisher is this way during a fire. The downside to being a troll is that people mentally tag you as toxic, associate with ulcers, and they stop listening to you for anything, including what might be good advice. Now, for some of us, that's going to be hard because we've been being a troll for years, right? Some of these trolls have been at it for as long as their careers because it's just what they do. And they do it online, and sometimes they do it in person, and sometimes they're really wonderful people in person, but they're really horrible online, or very occasionally vice versa. And I have to wonder, why are they making the choice to be this Jekyll and Hyde? Because it is a choice to do that. If you know how to be a nice person in person, why on earth can't you be a nice person online? It's not that hard, really. It takes a decision every day from every one of us that we want to make our world, the parts of the world that we occupy, better. A decision every day. You know who this person is, right? No? Oh, come on. Again, she smurfed, yeah. This is Amy Bauernschmidt. She is a naval aviator, captain in the United States Navy. She is the first woman ever to serve as the executive officer and then the commanding officer of a U.S. naval aircraft carrier. She took command of the USS Abraham Lincoln, one of our largest carriers, on 19th of August last year. She holds the Legion of Merit Defense Superior Service Medal, Meritorious Service Medal multiple times each. Experienced officer. In an interview on CNN, they asked her who inspires her success, and it was this person. Oh my gosh, he's blue. His name is Justin James Watt. The most effective defensive lineman of all time, widely regarded as such. He received the AP NFL Defensive Player of the Year award 3 times in his first 5 seasons with the Texans. He's now with the Arizona Cardinals. And he says, and this is the statement that Captain Bauernschmidt quoted, "Success is not owned, it is leased, and rent is due every day." Pay the debt on the success that you want to see in the world around you. Now that sounds very hippy-dippy, peace and love stuff, right? But I think it's sound advice. As a final piece of advice, be careful whose advice you buy, but be patient with those who supply it. Advice is a form of nostalgia. Dispensing it is a way of fishing the past from the disposal, wiping it off, painting over the ugly parts, and recycling it for more than it's worth. But trust me on the sunscreen. I want to thank all of you for being here. I appreciate your presence and your kind attention. Please go in peace with my best wishes for you and the people you love. Thank you. I think we're a little ahead of the groove. We do have some time for Q&A if anybody has anything or just bits to add. I mean, normally keynotes don't gear for that, but we have a little bit of time. I would throw in as a kind of side note or a bonus bit, are there people in the room that you care about very deeply? People for whom, as Robert Heinlein said, your happiness and well-being is consistent upon requires theirs. That their happiness and well-being modifies your own. And that if they're not happy and well, you're not either. Robert Heinlein called that the definition of love. Well, we've overloaded that function so much that it's kind of a ridiculous word to use. But are there people in the room or in our community that you care about very deeply? Have you told them? If not, why not? My biggest regret of my years of knowing Jeff Goff and David Adler is that I never told them. Don't make the same mistake I did, okay? If there's somebody you care about, let them know. It's just that simple. It doesn't have to be anything awkward. Just tell them. That's all I got. Todd? Okay, is it break time? It's break time. Thank you all for being here.